Welcome to Snooze Worthy, a podcast by Parenting Practice of Colorado, your window into the world of pediatric sleep, where we explore the science behind sweet dreams, effective sleep teaching techniques, and all the intriguing nuances of your child's slumber. I'm your host, Lindsey Burchfield.
And I'm Paige Legault. Together, we're here to guide you through the labyrinth of parenting, offering insights, strategies, and science-backed advice to make parenting during those early childhood years not just manageable, but truly memorable.
As pediatric sleep specialists, we've seen the transformational power of sleep in countless families.
And because parenting is a journey, we won't stop at sleep. We'll provide you with valuable parenting tips for every aspect of early childhood, from managing tantrums to fostering creativity and hitting those all-important milestones.
So whether you're a seasoned parent in need of a sleep overhaul or a new parent preparing for the joys and challenges of early childhood, Snooze Worthy is your trusted resource. Join us as we unravel the science of sleep, share practical advice, and make parenting truly snooze-worthy. Hi, and welcome back to Snooze Worthy. I'm Lindsey Burchfield. Today's episode is one I'm really excited about. And because we talk about sleep a lot here, sleep just doesn't live in isolation. What happens during our days absolutely affects what happens at night too. And especially when it comes to things like emotional regulation, routines, and stimulation. So what is one of the biggest daytime influences in families right now? Which I would say personally and professionally is screens. We're talking about YouTubing, gaming, tablets, shared device. Even at school, there is issued tech. So today we are so excited to be talking specifically about our lower elementary kids. So think ages 5 to 10 and how we build healthy and safe digital habits early before the big challenges arise. So I'm joined today by Jessica Speer. She's an author and she's currently completing another master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. She works directly with preteens and families, navigating the digital world in a supportive and evidence-informed way, which we just love. So Jessica, welcome to Snooze Worthy. We are so glad you're here. And would you just take a few moments to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Lindsey, and this awesome work that you're doing. I needed your podcast when my teenagers were young. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing too. I'm Jessica Speer. At this stage in my life, as you mentioned, I'm finishing a master's in mental health counseling and working with kids directly. And I also have written several books for elementary age kids on social emotional topics as well as digital wellness. My earlier life, I have a master's in social sciences, and I've always been fascinated with child development and relationships. And that got me into research, which then led into my books. And my third book is called The Phone Book. And it's all about, it's written for kids, written for the age range you mentioned. It's for kids, and it teaches them things that we as parents want them to know when they're online, as soon as they become digital citizens, which these days is very young. They're digital citizens, very young, and there's a lot to know when they're navigating an online world. So that's what inspired me to write that book. And I do work with a lot of parents too, just because I feel like this is one of the biggest challenges today for parents is how do we navigate screens? Because they've taken over our world, let's face it, and they're not going away. So how do we navigate them at home so that we can help our kids grow in safe and healthy ways?
Absolutely. Yeah. Screens are just everywhere. No matter where you look, you're going to find a digital device. And so, like you said, Jessica, work directly with families. So what are you currently seeing with screen use, specifically in these kiddos 5 to 10?
One of the most surprising things is how many hours kids are spending on screens. So at school, so much schoolwork has transferred to screens. So there's many hours often on a screen at the school day, but then, they get home, and how do we relax sometimes? We relax by picking up our iPad or a tablet or device and playing some games. And so I'm just seeing a huge displacement of what used to compose a normal childhood, which was, a lot more exercise, a lot more sleep, a lot more playtime. A lot of those activities are now getting transferred to screens. So that presents a big shift and a challenge for parents. How do we navigate that? So we make sure our kids are still, getting the exercise they need, building these healthy habits, getting the sleep they need, and even just the basic, you mentioned emotional regulation skills, learning to regulate those emotions on their own. So not relying on a device to regulate themselves.
Yes, that's just incredible and such good information and just so important. And I assume, right, that you are seeing digital challenges starting earlier
Mhm.
than what you did before. And a lot of times, does that take parents by surprise?
It does. And what I hear from parents is that that's often the biggest strife at home is the battles for screen time. So, and this because screens are so involved in our lives now, it starts earlier and earlier. So what I always recommend is as early as you can, definitely by kindergarten, start to create some sort of family tech plan. You can search online. There's great models online. Search family tech plan. Sometimes it's called a family media plan. There's examples of these plans on the American Academy of Pediatrics website, but just start with something like what are our rules as a family when it comes to devices? Knowing that the plan you put in place when someone is 5 is not going to be the same plan when they're 10 or even 15, but just really coming together as a family. And what does this look like? Where are screens not allowed in the house? How much screen time are we allowed to have outside of school? What are we allowed to be doing on screens? And how do we navigate these challenges that come up with screens as a family together? So just starting those conversations really early, putting some clear boundaries in place and leaving it all up for discussion. I find the plans that are often most successful is kids have a little bit of say in those. So I usually start by recommending bring it to the dinner table and some night talk about it, like talk about because kids will have some things to say on that. And of course, we might not say yes to all their ideas, but to pull in some of their ideas for these media plans is going to help it be more acceptable to them too.
Yes, I love that. And we talk a ton in our work about choice and allowing the children to be part of the process and setting the routines because again, you're going to get way more buy-in if they're going to be part of that process, and it's just so important that they are also bought into what you're doing. So I love that. Thank you for sharing about those wonderful resources. And one of the things we also find a lot with the work that we do is that behavior shifts show up in bedtime. And one of it has to do with emotional dysregulation and things of that nature. And so, are you noticing emotional or regulation changes that have been tied to screen exposure in these younger kiddos?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit earlier. So sometimes as a parent, and I've done this myself, we want to calm our child down. And what works really instantly is to hand them a tablet. That could be like immediately calming for them. But by doing that, we're not really teaching them how to learn to calm themselves. And a lot of what they're seeing on that screen might actually be activating their nervous system and feeding them some dopamine. So especially in the evening times, as early as you can in the night, wean off the screens, begin to slow the pace down, be really careful about what they're exposed to and have a really nice wind down routine. Their bodies need that. These devices do really amp us up and pull us in. They're designed to pull us in. Just keeping that in mind and trying to keep devices out of that routine as much as possible. And so kids can learn to start to settle themselves on their own and create their own healthy habits of how am I starting to de-escalate myself and settle myself down for sleep.
Absolutely. And I love that. That fits in perfectly with the direction we give our families. So we talk a lot about not have any electronic use at least an hour before bed. Let's give us the opportunity to wind down, not only because the content can be overstimulating, but also that blue light emittance that is coming from our digital devices and how much that really impacts our circadian rhythm. Light exposure is just so important when it comes to sleep circadian rhythm. And unfortunately, our digital devices are emitting the wrong kind of light for bedtime.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we give a lot of direction around that. And I love that you are saying those same things. It's important to remove that from that wind down routine so we really can get ready for bed.
Yeah, and I'm sure you also always talk about just those rituals, the reading ritual, either reading together or giving them some reading time, in a paper format. Let's not go digital books at this point, a paper format. Just those things that become really predictable and really calm at the end of their day to help ease them into sleep.
Yes, absolutely. So I love that you talked about having a tech plan for the family. But when we say a healthy digital habits, let's say we're saying healthy digital habits for a 6, 8, or 10-year-old, what does that actually realistically look like in a family?
Okay. At the foundational level, healthy habits means their screen time isn't displacing sleep, exercise, eating healthy, doing schoolwork, or their relationships with their parents. So all those things. So all those things really are present when there's some healthy boundaries and behaviors going on in the school when it comes to technology. But what that looks like on the ground is over time, and this is going to, if this is presents a big change for families, it means over time there isn't such conflict when the screen time, whatever the number is, maybe it's an hour a day, when they hit that, there's less struggle there. The child is learning to calm themselves without a device if things are really difficult for them. So that's kind of the next level, but the base level gets back to those basic functions that we need as humans to really be well. And a new study just came out about, and this is not surprising, knowing how many hours kids spend on screens, that kids are not getting, especially in even elementary and middle, and especially high school, kids aren't getting adequate sleep, and they're not getting the adequate amount of physical activity. So they're not after school maybe going out to play or going to do some sort of physical activity. So those things aren't happening. We're seeing an uptick in obesity, especially in elementary and middle school kids. And that's just the shift in these behaviors that used to be so commonplace, but are harder to make happen now because these devices are so enticing and fun for kids. So yeah, I would get back to the basics. Let's get back to how much they're moving their bodies, how many hours they're sleeping, how are the relationships going within the family. The more conversations you can have about tech, the better. So they're really aware, how this works in our family, and trying to do that in non-shaming ways. So having those conversations in really informative ways that shows that you're looking out for their health and safety. You're just the rule person. This is why we're doing this as a family. This is what we know about screens, and this is why we have this rule. So being really, especially in elementary school, they want that information. They're going to want to know why. So be really clear as to why your family does it this way.
I think that's great. And I thank you for pointing out the areas that if things are happening in this way, our child is not getting the right amount of exercise, they're not getting the right amount of sleep. Let's say they're very irritable or they need that device to calm down, that those are potential red flags that, hey, we really do need to do something here, potentially to pull back on that screen time use or whatever that may be. And so if you are a parent and you've noticed these things with your children, we might have some red flags here. What would you say are the first couple of things that they could do to really help start to build those digital habits that are healthy so it doesn't get totally out of whack for them?
Mm-hmm. I always remind parents that a reset can happen at any time, because we all get into these situations where like, oh, this did not end up how I intended it to be. So I'm seeing this pattern in my family and I don't love where we're headed on this. Reset is possible at any time. And I always make sure when it's time for family reset, I myself am in a really calm, grounded place. My nervous system is fairly regulated. I've thought this through in my head. I know what I'm hoping to influence in my family. And from a really calm space, we come together and we talk about it. And now we're talking elementary school kids. So I'm going to keep it brief. I'm not going to go on a very long diatribe about what it is. I might start with that one thing. I might start with maybe the thing is the amount of screen time. So I don't want to, at that moment, come up with 10 new things we need to be doing. I'm just going to focus on that one thing. Like, this is what I'm seeing. I've noticed that we've gone from 1 hour on screen time, and now it looks like we're way up to 2 hours. And what I'd like to see, what I know as your mom is really good for your health is this. So what are some ways that we can get back to that? So I'm engaging them in the process, really calm. It's conversational. I'm not shaming them. I'm just noticing something that's going on in our family, and we're talking about it as a family, and then we're finding solutions together. So that's how I would tackle that. Small, short, and inclusive of the kid.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And especially the non-shaming approach. That's the last thing that we want to be doing in any conversation with our child. Is there any data out there that states that this number of hours per day for this age range is healthy or something that we should be shooting for as a goal?
And again, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some guidelines out there. So their guidelines are 0 screens before 18 months, which might surprise some people.
Yeah.
So zero screens before 18 months of age. When we get up to the elementary school, what they still like often is co-viewing. So it might be an hour, depending on the age, an hour or 2 of screen time co-viewing. But I know as a parent, that's really hard because sometimes that screen time is when we can actually throw in a load of laundry. Yeah. Or so if co-viewing is not possible, just make sure it's really educational. So it's high quality educational content that you are familiar with and comfortable with. So I'm a realist there. I know that there's no way sometimes as a mom to co-view everything with your kindergartner, but we've carefully thought through what are they watching and do we feel comfortable with that? And I'm also a fan, especially at these early ages, of some security measures at home, like some lockdowns on your router or on whatever device they're on to make sure they don't have just open access to YouTube. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff on YouTube that we wouldn't want them to accidentally click on,
Yep.
so a very inappropriate ad on YouTube, they might be watching something very educational on YouTube, but they click on an ad and it takes them someplace you don't want them to be. So in the elementary years, those security measures help. Once they get to middle school, they're going to work around that.
We are. Yeah.
So in the elementary years, we do our best to just try to keep them from viewing really inappropriate content. And then by the time we get to middle school, we've had so many conversations that we know they're gonna hit that inappropriate content, but we've kind of mentally prepared them for that, and we've given them some ideas of what to do when they land on some really inappropriate, which would be violent or very sexual stuff, which is unavoidable, especially when you've got upper elementary, preteen, teen kids that are out there searching for information, or they're at friends' houses. It's really hard to lock it down. So conversations are important because that's coming. That is coming at some point.
Yeah, you certainly can't be naive about what's out there and what's possible, but I love that conversation of talking about it often and early. We are all fans here at Parenting Practice of early intervention and early conversation, and I think that's so important in just setting that foundation for your family, what your values are, what we do, what we don't do. I assume that based on what you were saying around especially co-viewing, that you have a specific perspective on devices in a bedroom, but what would you say about having devices in a bedroom for a kiddo that's 5 to 10 years old?
I would say keep devices out of the bedroom as long as you possibly can. So I feel you're going to have the best luck with that all through elementary school. And it's going to become a real hot topic when you hit middle school. And every family is going to make their own choice there. But the middle school families I work with, I'm always surprised that the majority of middle schoolers do have a device through the night. And I see the impact of that. The middle schoolers will tell me how many hours they're spending in the middle of the night on their phone. So this is really happening. So as long as you can, just keep it out. And if they're on the couch, they're using their hours, screen time, you know exactly what they're watching, and you can walk by and just, you're there. If you can't co-view with them, you're walking by, you can kind of see what they're watching, ask them about it later, just giving them the freedom to maybe watch, but they know you're right there. You're right in the kitchen watching. So you probably would say the same thing, Lindsey, but I'm like, keep it out as long as you possibly can keep it out of the bedroom.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, we 100% agree with that. I mean, our suggestion is even as adults to keep digital devices outside of the bedroom. In my family, we are not allowed to take our tablets, and we do have time limits on into our rooms. Like that's just a hard no. My kiddos know that. They don't even wear headphones, so I can walk by, I can hear, I can see, because again, I think it's just so important that we know what they're engaging with, but also from a sleep perspective, our bedrooms are for sleeping, right?
Yeah.
For doing all these other things, and taking, like you said, a device in could lead to middle of the night scrolling, which we need to be sleeping then. We don't need to be scrolling. So,
and you shared just a beautiful way to model. And so that's another thing I talk to parents about. You are modeling that devices don't go in the bedroom. So that's not even conceivable to them because they haven't actually seen that happen. So that modeling, especially in these elementary years, are so important. So what I encourage, since we all can often just pick up our devices and look at them without even knowing.
Addictive.
Yeah, so what I encourage parents to do that will help build healthy screen habits in their kids is start to dictate what you're doing. Say you are about to go on a road trip and you're picking up your phone and you just say out loud, like, I'm going to check the weather to make sure that it looks good for our drive. And then I'm getting in my car and I'm like, I'm going to tuck my phone in my purse in the back seat so I don't look at it. So everything you do, start to vocalize that, because instead of me picking up my phone, they have no idea what I'm doing. They think I'm actually disengaged from them. Yeah. And so we can maintain connection if they know that I'm actually doing something that's looking out for our family, or because I need to do this right now and it's this, then it doesn't look to them like mom doesn't care about me in this moment. But by using that and putting language to that, I'm teaching them how to use your phone as a resource instead of it's just something I need to keep checking because I'm kind of addicted to my phone. So that would almost be my number one tip for parents as early as you can, but definitely in the elementary school years, because in the elementary school years, they're getting really interested in having more device time and their own device. So
Yeah.
let's show them how we're using them in a daily life and how we're not using them. And when we're putting them away, just by speaking out loud, that's going to help them out so much.
That's fantastic. That's an incredible tip. And I definitely will use that because there's a lot of times you're doing something intentionally, but they, like you said, they don't know that. They just think that you were distracted or not engaging with them when they need you. So thank you for that wonderful tip or trick. I'll definitely be using that one for sure. And you said as kids get older, they're more interested in more screen time and new things, and their friends talk about XYZ show and things of that nature. I have a 7-year-old, almost 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And the 7-year-old, she's in first grade and she's hearing a lot of things from her friends about let's watch this or do that. And so when I will give a limit or I will say, this is all the screen time that we have, you hit your limit today, there's some pushback in that. How do you suggest explaining or describing to our kiddos why we have limits on our screen time? Or why we're choosing not to engage in XYZ content? Do you have scripts that you could give us as tips and tricks on how to navigate those questions and those and that pushback when it comes?
Yeah. And again, because we're talking elementary schools, we're going to have to talk about this a lot. And so we got to keep it short, and I have to watch myself here. Like I want to launch into everything I know about brain studies and
Right. All the things.
I have to contain myself and just pick the one thing that I want to share in that moment, knowing I'm going to have many other moments because this conversation is going to keep coming up. But one thing I love to start educating elementary school kids about is why technologies are built in a way that keep us staring at them. So I actually, in the phone book, the first chapter is, why tech companies want us staring at our screens. So in the briefest, most simple ways, I start to teach them about, hey, this is how advertising works. Like, have you noticed that you might search for something and all of a sudden you're getting, so I'm just in a way that's, again, not shaming, but this is why it's sometimes hard to put these down because that these companies actually, their business is to keep us on these devices. So we have to get really good at making sure we're taking care of ourselves because we need to make sure we're eating healthy and getting exercise. So I'm kind of doing both constantly and briefly, but at the same time, and here's the trick, because it can very soon start to sound like I'm just being negative. I'm against technology. And that, by the time they're in upper elementary school, they're gonna be like, all right, whatever, mom.
Right.
So I have to balance that out with the awesomeness of screens.
Love that.
Like I might have to say, we're driving, like, I can't believe this GPS got us right here. Back in the old days, I would have had to look at a map. I'm talking to them about this is the tough side. This is the challenge. And this is how this works. But this is the cool side. And it's our job as a family to learn how to really take advantage of the cool stuff, but keep ourselves away from these dangers because these devices are so intelligently built that we could spend all our time there. And that wouldn't be good for us as a family or as growing humans.
Yes, that's great. The balance is so important because there's incredible things that tech brings to our lives and allows us to do or see. And so I like that, being able to balance both of those, but making sure that we're talking early and often about just what's awesome about it, but what we also need to keep an eye on as well. So I know that you also talk a lot about navigating friendships and things like this in this age range. And so I've heard a lot about kiddos that are maybe in middle and high school and how using digital devices has changed a lot of how they interact with one another, maybe even how friendships are. And so are you seeing friendships shifting at all in these early elementary ages because of digital exposure?
In early elementary, I'm not seeing as many shifts, but there are a lot of shifts happening when kids start to, in some places, it depends school to school, community to community, but in some communities, by the end of elementary school, a lot of kids have it's maybe a simple smartwatch, or they might even have their own cell phone, so it just depends on the family and the place. And that has a big shift on friendships. So what it ends up happening is you've got the kids that their parents are really holding back, and they're not going to give their kid a phone until eighth grade or a freshman. And then there's some that have all this access, and that could be a real challenge in a friendship, because once kids do have access to these devices, and some of their friends do, those friends start communicating on those devices with each other. So this is real challenging, especially in middle school, because I'm seeing a big divide, especially since the release of the book, The Anxious Generation, which influenced, and if parents haven't read that, that's an amazing book by Jonathan Haidt. The Anxious Generation really talks about what we're seeing with kids and screens. And so some parents have read that and shifted way back, like they are pulling way back on the time frame that they're going to give their kid a smartwatch or a cell phone, and some are not at all. And so there's really different things happening. Playing field was pretty level when we were in upper elementary and middle school, and it's not anymore. And that just brings a whole set of challenges, because what's hard for parents is, if there's a group of friends and you're one of the parents that's trying to delay this, but most of the other kids in the friend group have this, it's really hard to maintain those friendships. I'll be totally honest with you. If all those other kids are communicating this device, it does shift friendships. So this is a tough one. This is a tough one to navigate as a family. So again, a lot of conversations, but staying true to what you feel is right for your family and your child. And in these conversations, a lot of conversations about the why we're doing this and what we value as a family. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. This is a real challenge, especially once you hit the middle school years.
Absolutely. And I've seen that just amongst family members and my nieces and my nephews, and just the challenges that it does bring to the table. And even like you said, kids in Riley's first grade class, some of them have these smart, watches and things of that nature. So it is starting earlier for sure. Is there any data behind when it's appropriate for a child to get a phone or a smartwatch? Has anything been done? Or is there anything out there that could help parents understand, based on the data, this is a good age where they can actually handle it?
Yeah, and it sure depends on what is on that device and the maturity of the child. So there's so many factors, but a fully connected smartphone, we're seeing more pushback. Like as you probably heard, Australia just banned social media all the way up to the age of 16, because we realize the developing adolescent brain actually probably can't handle a lot of the social stuff going on until that. And so the U.S. is really slow to putting safeguards in place, which is unfortunate. Other countries around the world are putting much clearer guardrails in place for kids. And so in the United States, that's putting a lot on the shoulders of parents. But if we're talking social media, the preteen years are real challenging years no matter what. And but then you add social media to the mix where they're comparing, and they can, it gets real challenging for that age group. So, to get back to your original question, it depends on the child. It depends on what content they have on their phone, and the access and where. So that's a complicated question. And it's going to be different for every family. It's even going to be different for neurotypical and neurodiverse kids. So there's some differences there on the approach.
Yes, I love that. The intention is so important.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think that there's a lot of talk about social media. I feel like parents are pretty well aware of the earlier you give it to a child, there can be a lot of impacts with that. Like you said, alone comparison, that's a huge one. Feeling left out, all those things. But I think there's one area that doesn't get as much attention. And I've unfortunately heard a lot of negative things about gaming at this age and getting involved in some of those online gaming platforms. So what is your perspective on that?
As soon as they're into gaming and connecting with other people, like strangers, there's going to be risk. But you would think even something simple, like say they're in a shared Minecraft room or something like that, there's always going to be people trying to move around that. So even roadblocks, I don't know if, roadblocks is a big one for elementary age kids. Even in an open text chat in a platform like Roadblocks, there's kids are going to try to, or who knows, they could be adults. We don't know who these people are. They could be sneaking in. They're trying to sneak in inappropriate words. So I remember co-viewing that with my kids and seeing, oh, okay, they're writing this way because it's actually a swear word, but they're changing the spelling to slide. So just know that in gaming, as soon as you open it up and they're playing player games with somebody outside of your home or another network, that's going to happen. So I like to equip kids with some ways to get out of that. And so if you're going to go there, if you're going to open this up so they can play games with other people, make sure they have some tools in their back pocket. So one, they know this is likely to happen. You're going to talk to them that there's going to be some people who might actually start to approach you and ask you some personal information, or they're going to try to sneak bad words into this, and so you give them the choices. You can just get out of the game. You can write, hey, keep it to the game in the text chat. So giving them a few things to do in those situations. And you might have a preference. You might be like, hey, you need to just, when you see that happening, what I'd like for you to do is just drop out of that game and join another game. So just realize that is going to happen as soon as it's a game that you're connecting with others. Even if it's a simple child-based game, there's constantly people trying to work around those guardrails, even there. So yeah, keeping that in mind.
Well, thank you for sharing, because I think that is so important to understand that there are other people out there, maybe with a nefarious thought or an idea or action. And so we have to be aware of that and make sure that our children are too, so that they can be safe and we can keep them safe. So one last question for you before we wrap up. But what is one digital habit you wish every family with these elementary age kids would implement?
Oh gosh. Okay. One habit. Let me think about that. Well, and I'm not saying this because you're a sleep podcast, but I'm such an advocate for sleep. But as you know, if that is in place, so many other things fall in place. So my number one, I would love for all kids to get more sleep. And so I would say whatever media plan you've got in place, just keep protecting that sleep. In those elementary years, in those middle school years, as long as you can as a parent, just keep trying to get those kids to sleep, because they're going to function better in every area of their life. So that means, again, keeping the screens out of the bedrooms, stopping screens well before bedtime. So that was maybe not the answer you're looking for, but I am just like you. Sleep is so important to their mental health. And I do feel, we have a record number of kids struggling with anxiety and depression right now. And there's many fundamental reasons for that. And one of those is sleep too.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of sleep deprived kids out there.
Well, that couldn't be a better answer in my book. We here at Parenting Practice believe the exact same thing. That's why we do what we do. All right, Jessica, where can families connect with you and learn more about your wonderful books?
The easiest place is my website, which is Jessica Speer, SPEER.com. And so that's got links off to, places to buy my books. It's got my social media, which I'm not very active on, but I am sort of there. But I have a lot of free resources on my website. So there's tons of articles and resources that families are welcome to download and use.
That's awesome. Well, we will link everything in the show notes so people can get into contact with you. And, when you are listening, if you are realizing that digital habits may be impacting sleep in your home, you do have to remember, like we've been talking about, that sleep doesn't live in isolation. So if emotional regulation is off, then your bedtime becomes harder. When you have inconsistent boundaries, which we talk about all the time, sleep becomes inconsistent. Healthy sleep, healthy boundaries, and healthy digital habits, they all work together. And so if you feel like you are in a space where your rhythm is just dysregulated, you're not getting the sleep that you need, we have wonderful support here at Parenting Practice through our one-on-ones, but we also have our membership for sleep evaluation calls, and we would love to connect with you. So Jessica, thank you so much again for being here, and we hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.